The whole is back in order. When we recessed last evening, we were on section 2. In my opening statement, I attempted to explain how the Office of Finance and Budget arrived at the revenue projection that we have in that section. If any member has any questions about that, I can go through it more in depth. I also have OFB here. Are there any questions as it relates to any of the numbers that are there, or should we explain each one of the numbers as we go down? Senator Duggan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess in regards to the overall compilation of the numbers, if by any chance you can reflect on the GRTs as well. I know that those were some of the deviations from the previously submitted budget, and what the tracking mechanism is, whether it be referred to the GRT or the income tax as it relates to the revenue proposal, please.
Okay. All right. As it relates, the major changes that we had in coming to this number. In business privilege tax, the committee recommended the business privilege tax for FY15 be $247 million. BPT collections for FY14 are tracking at $233 million. Historically, business privilege tax has increased approximately 5 to 6% over year. The 247 projection is just about 6%. In the governor's numbers, he had business privilege tax $258.8, which the committee felt was 11%. We could not justify that, and we thought that the 247 was more conservative, and that is the reason why we made that recommendation. Does anybody have any further questions that I can have OFB explain more in detail? The other major change was in withholding and in corporate. The committee recommended withholding tax projections for FY 2015 at $239. This is mainly due to the full effect of the Competitive Wage Act, the law enforcement pay increases during 2015. In FY14, the Competitive Wage Act and the law enforcement officers' pay increases were only in effect for a portion of the year. The Competitive Wage Act for 7 months out of the year, and even then not for all employees. The law enforcement pay increase only 10 months out of the year. Given the full effect of the competitive wage and the law enforcement pay increases, as well as the effect of the increase in the minimum wage and the opening of the two hotels, the Dustani and the Lotte, and the opening, hopefully in the next fiscal year, of the new hospital, the committee believes that the projections for withholding represent a conservative approach to this. The current tracking for business, for withholding and the recommendation. Is there anybody who has any questions about withholding? The current tracking is 231.1. The committee also recommended corporate income tax projections for 2015 at 126. Corporate income tax collection for 2014 are currently tracking at 123.4. Historically, corporate income tax increased about 2 to 3% year over year, and we believe that the 126 projection is about 2.5% increase over the current year, and we felt comfortable with that. That's barely 2.5 million over what we are currently. Is there any question about that? On the income, individual taxes and the use of money in any and license and fees, The slight bump in the license and fees was only because we've now have, the general fund projection is 348 due to tracking the fund being at around 4.9. The original projection of 2015, for FY 2015, in 269 to 32 was 4.6. So the difference between the committee and the governor was about 300,000. Any major question with that one? Senator?
It's more or less, Mr. Chairman, a collective question because you just highlighted the corporate, the individual, and the withholding taxes. Now, is there any ongoing increased effort on the part of Revenue Tax to collect overdue or back due payments, taxes, that may conceivably add to this particular figure?
As I understand it, the oversight chair has been writing, literally with several oversights over Revenue Tax on almost a monthly basis, trying to make sure that Revenue Tax brings down the number of its outstanding. I believe the chairman has successfully been able to bring the outstanding down by sitting on Revenue Tax and insisting that they do that. And as we'll discuss in TAF, I think part of the increase in that was when we raised the issue about whether or not all TAF was being paid because of some of the hotels and the fact that it could possibly be audited. We've seen a major increase, and we'll get down to that in Tourist Attraction Fund. Okay. As it relates to the general fund total, is there any major issue with any of those provisions? The federal source is just what we were advised was going to be received. We'll note that in 2013, the amount went from 54 to 96, and we don't know what 2014 is going to be. But this is the number that was given to us, and so this is the number that we've included for Section 30. Immigration and passport. Most of the others were just as recommended. The major deviations were in special funds. In special funds, the largest variance between this bill and the governor's bill was in the Tourist Attraction Fund. And I believe all of you met with GVB and their board members, and they have been able to show you that as of next month, they should be getting to 32 million, and that with the two new hotels going up, that the 34.5 is not a far stretch and may actually be conservative. And so the committee was willing to adopt that. And the other major increase was in the street light fund. The committee recommended an increase of $1 million based on tracking. Current year is about 4.6, and so we believe that we'll be able to meet the street light of 4.8. Last year it was at 3.6. The governor recommended 3.7, but current tracking is 4.6. A $200,000 increase over the next year is minimal. The other major increase was in Section 2718. That's the medical loss ratio. The administration recommended 3.5. The FY14 we received 7.4. We even went down from the 7.4. We believe that the medical loss ratio of the 2718 is starting to balance out. The first year, we weren't sure about what the amount was. I know many of you didn't believe it was happening. It happened. Last year, the governor's recommendation was conservative, but with all the ways that the insurance companies went, it actually was at 7.4, and we believe that this amount is is reasonable. It's actually conservative compared to this year. It's down from this year tracking, but up from what the governor had proposed, because we didn't believe that they would make that same, not a mistake, but overpricing in the insurance. I don't believe, the highway fund, there was a 1.3 increase as a result of current tracking, which is about 19.9. And so we just left it at that, which is more than what the governor had recommended, which was 18.6, but right now it's already tracking at 19. So we just left it at 19.9, which is where they're tracking to date. And that's car registrations. I don't believe there was anything other major in this section. Anybody have any questions on these revenue projections? Special thing. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Office of Finance and Budget for their hard work in putting this together. And your explanation of the logic behind the numbers is very sound, and there's no refuting how we're applying tracking to the projections. My only concern is when we strip out the federal matching grant and aid revenue, and we get to a base number of total tax revenue generated by the island of Guam, it comes out to $830,960,976. And I kind of just wanted to put that figure into perspective with respect to what we appropriated in fiscal year 2014, which was $762,822,796. And the difference between the two is about $68,138,180. Now, understandably, based on the tracking and the growth projections and everything else, it's not necessarily unreasonable that we're going to be expecting a $68 million increase, but that is overall a 9% increase from what we have budgeted for in fiscal year 2014. And I just wanted to state for the record my concerns, not so much with the validity of the numbers, because they are sound and they are valid, but I do have concerns with respect to how our budget in fiscal year 2014 was impacted by so many external circumstances that have resulted in areas not getting fully funded. For example, the Department of Education is short approximately $6 million because their appropriation from the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund did not come in at what was projected at the time. The hospital is short $14 million in fiscal year 2014 because we projected X amount coming in for the Healthy Futures Fund, but a lot of that was eroded by tax credits that were used to offset that revenue. GPD, we found out, has that $2 million in booked overtime that we didn't know about and we didn't budget for in 2014 because they were booking that off balance sheet. And so these concerns, when you add them all up, tax credits that are eroding revenue projections from things like the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund that don't come in because the government doesn't follow through on implementing those increases, and off-balance sheet bookings that we are not factoring into the budget, that we all of a sudden have to come riding into the rescue at the last minute. All of those things are adding up to really weigh down our revenue streams and adversely impact our budget. My other concern, Mr. Chairman, is, for example, with the pay increase and the law enforcement pay adjustment that is included as a provision in this bill, we wouldn't be able to make those payments if it wasn't for the Section 30 windfall that we've gotten or that we're projected to get from the federal government. And so absent that windfall, this $762 million would not have been sufficient to be able to meet those obligations. So while the tracking does reflect that an increase in the budget is something that we can reasonably anticipate, I do think that it would be prudent for us to also include in this budget certain safeguards against the possibility that there may be external circumstances such as tax credits or property revaluations that don't take place, or off-balance sheet bookings of expenditures that all of a sudden come creeping back to us at the last minute that we need to appropriate for. I would like for us to put safeguards within this budget that would ensure that the tracking that we are basing our next fiscal year projections on actually materializes in the coming quarters. So I can comfortably accept these revenue projections on the caveat that we do have a safeguard in place that's going to provide quarterly checkpoints to make sure the revenue is coming in as projected. And I thank the chairman for including that provision here in the budget. It's further in the back, but I do thank you for working with me on that, and I thank the Office of Finance and Budget on their hard work in putting together a projection here that's realistically based, but also including a provision that's going to provide us with the safeguards in case any other external circumstances cause us to have revenue issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I should also make mention that straight off the top, we've taken off provision for tax refund at 118, and we've made, yes, and the provision for servicing our bonds are also taken into account of 78 million. Senator Limtiaco, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I do share some of the same concerns that the retiring speaker has regarding the revenue projections. And although OFB has made it very clear as to what substantiates those increase in revenue numbers, I do would like to request just clarification on 2014's revenues. And in 2014's budget, can OFB comment on the under projection in revenues for 2014 and what the delta between that and the 2015 projections are? Because I believe that for 2014, the delta being so large now when we compare 2014 and 2015, just apples to apples, doesn't take into consideration a potential under projection of 2014's revenue. So if OFB can just comment on what the under projection was for against last year 2014's budget.
Okay, I'll have them address that, but unless I'm mistaken, I thought the reports that I keep getting is that revenue is $3 million over what was projected, but I'll let them explain it more. Maybe that might be press release. I don't know, but that's the number that I saw in the BBMR DOA.
Yeah, my concern is that maybe the 9% increase from 2014 to 2015 might be inflated because of the under projection in 2014.
Hapade Center. Apologize for my voice, I'm a little under the weather. But I think the number one issue here that we see the difference between the tracking for FY14 and what was projected in Public Law 3268 was the corporate income taxes. The corporate income tax projection was 104.8 million, and we're seeing a tracking of around 123. And so that makes up the largest variance between what was originally projected and what's currently tracking. And so that's around an $18.5 million variance. So.
Okay, well, was that the only delta, just the corporate income tax, or was there other revenues that were under projected that
Yes.
that make up a larger percentage of that 9% year-over-year increase in revenues?
Sure.
Because that's my concern as well, is that to see a 9% jump in 1 year, it's not from organic growth. It's from one other factors, either potentially, like you said, roughly 19 million in corporate income tax that was under projected from 2014.
Yes.
Were there any other mitigating factors?
Well, let me just go on further. Withholding taxes also is tracking at 231, and the original projection in 3268 as amended was 226 million, and so there's another $4.8 million variance. Typically, corporate income taxes, they're based on tax year 2013 events, and so OFB thought that one of the major impact on corporate income taxes, the difference between the projection and in the original budget bill and the tracking, was typically mainly due to visitor arrivals. It was reported that in 2013, it was the highest visitor arrivals in 1990s. So with corporate taxes being paid 1 year later after those economic events has occurred, that we see that these the highest visitor arrivals also is a large effect on the large variance between what's tracking and what was originally projected. In addition, we saw a lot of things occur in 2013, such as there was an increment, a lot of government spending, inclusive of payroll expenses, which also lead to increased consumption and consumer spending. And so we attribute that to, in 2013, there was an increment lump sum, retroactive payments, inactive employee retro merit bonus payments in July. The judiciary paid out some merit bonuses in October 2013. And of course, law enforcement retroactive salary increases were paid out in December. And so we attribute those to the increased variance between the tracking and the original projection. So.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, just for the record, once again, it's the concern is that we have this large increase in revenue. Obviously, some of it attributed to under projections from the prior fiscal year and 2014's budget. But we're making several decisions in this coming budget, as we've done for the last 6 months, that have a permanent effect on our ability to, on our expenses, notably the hay, as well as some other provisions in this year's budget that we're going to need to perpetuate. So making sure that we're not just seeing a spike in revenues and more of a gentle slope of revenue increases is my concern, that we need to plan for sustainability in our ability to meet these obligations year over year, in addition to our debt obligations. So those are my concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just a couple of things. The aggregate number that we've come up with was actually adopted by SES. I know Senator Ben abstained from that vote because he had issues about some of the individual parts. But I think now that we've added them all up together, it comes up pretty close to what the governor had projected. Maybe a little more now that we've taken into account TAF, but we're all in the same basic ballpark. First I want to thank OFB for all the work that they've done. I mean, they're an excellent staff. But the other thing is they didn't just take the spike, what might have been a spike this year, as being the basis upon which they do anything. They've also looked and gone back and done historically what the numbers were over the last 5 and 3 years of each one of those, looking at those, because they take all that into account. It's not just this 1 year and we're going to live with it. They go back and look at all the numbers, and I not only trust them implicitly, but we've gone through it and they've tried to explain it to my simple mind. I've been able to at least absorb most of it. But if there's any other questions, many of you can ask any further questions that you may want. Are there questions on the special revenue amounts? I believe these were as reported in the original bill, as was sent to us. And all the federal grants. So we come up to a total of 766, taking out the 118. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't have an objection, just wanted to state for the record, and I know you mentioned it, that the provisions for tax refund is stated to be $118 million. And just for the record, this year, it's the amount that we've set aside is about 120, I believe, for this fiscal year. Am I correct on that, right?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. So even though I know that whatever amount we put here really, doesn't matter, because there's a court order upon us that we must pay regardless of what that amount is. And so that's something that we all know and understand. Just my concern is that this number now is not consistent with everything else we're doing in terms of we're looking at growth, whether it be organic or whether it be other factors that we just discussed. But I think what we'll see later on as we discuss the budget is that this amount now is being used to fund something else that, at least in my mind, is not a priority. And so this is just something I don't intend to object to it, but I just like to state for the record and perhaps deal with it as we move forward in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Senator Duenas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I certainly concurred with the retiring speaker on his concern, but I would just like to reflect that the agreement that we had discussed together and had made was, I'm not sure though that I concur on the unimportance. The agreement that we discussed on finding these revenues to make sure the budget is balanced was based on critical agencies, revenue and taxation, collecting the monies, Department of Administration, administering personnel services, and getting out the very tax refunds we're talking about. And the list goes on, mental health services for our infirmed. And so while I concur that, there is, of course, it wouldn't seem to match with the corporate revenues, with probably withholding that our employees, will be paying in terms of taxes, employers, and the like. I still think that in the spirit of our balanced budget, keeping to the numbers, and as was eloquently stated when we started this process, if you are going to find revenues, for any other purposes outside of what's stated here in the budget, then certainly you must do an offset. So in closing to this remark, Mr. Chairman, I think we have seen at least a commitment that you yourself had called for whenever there were recognized additional revenues in Section 30. I know that probably this current reconciliation may be somewhat of a one-time or a multi-year that would come to a close, but I do think that there is significant indications that the realignment is on track, and that in the coming years we will see additional Section 30, not by reconciliation, but by additional personnel on Guam. So I think that this moving target, if you will, on tax refunds, and for the point stated by the retiring speaker, the issue of the court order, certainly I think that between this body, the executive branch, and all concerned, including those who file their taxes post haste as soon as they get their W-4, W-2, will hold every one of us accountable for making sure that those tax refunds get paid out. And we all know that Section 30 comes, typically at the end of the fiscal year as well, when those remittances are made. So I feel confident that we could stay within the budget, utilize the flexibility provided herein, while understanding that the number is, as adequately stated, doesn't seem to track with the balance of others. But I would just simply state for the record that the negotiations we had made together are for critical spot agencies, and also at the insistence of you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the majority, that this be locked in to classified public service positions and for no other purposes. So I thank you for your flexibility, and I thank you for allowing me to comment on this section. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, no, please. I want everybody to have a chance. And so we come up to the grand total of 684, taking out the 118 for the and general fund revenue being 766, taking out the tax refund. We now have available for appropriation 648, 044,582, 648,044,542. Anybody have any other questions, or is there a motion to adopt this section?
Just a procedural question, Mr. Chairman. I was under the impression that when this bill was placed before second reading and for the committee in the whole, that it was adopted in totality, and that moving forward, any amendments or any changes to be proffered would be accepted, but that it's already been accepted and adopted by the members here before discussion commenced. So I'm just trying to understand
Okay,
how
no,
you proceed.
I misspoke. If there's no further objection, we can move forward. All right, thank you very much, colleagues. Section 3, authorization to pay and prioritize payment of tax. That's the 118. Any objection, Senator?
Not an objection, just a question. I know this was brought up previously, Mr. Chairman, but the $118 million figure is a figure that was endorsed by the executive branch representatives, correct?
Correct. That was
Okay.
in their original bill.
I just wanted to ensure that the modification that reflects the new number now of $118 million is because this particular figure was endorsed by representatives of the
That's
administration.
what was in the original bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If there's no amendments or objection to Section 3, we'll move to Section 4. On the revenue collections in excess of quarterly collections, that's a boilerplate. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to Section 4C, lines 20 and 21, these two lines in particular affect a provision further into the bill, but I did want to delete the words, motion to strike the words, starting with the word in and ending at BBMR on lines 20 and 21. So we'll strike out in excess of the revenue budget submitted by BBMR.
So then it would read, the Director of Administration shall report to the Speaker of the Legislature and Guam and the Office of Finance and Budget the amount of quarterly revenue collections by BBMR pursuant to subsection A of this section on the 20th day after the end of each quarter.
That would
It's
be
not
fine.
just the excess, but the entire revenue collection. Everybody understand that? Any objection to the amendment? Any other issues on Section 4?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just a question on the subsection Delta D, the $5.5 million. I understand that was part of the original budget submission, and it's being reiterated here. Has the committee or the legislature received any MOU or understanding in writing as to what the agreement is between the government of Guam and the IRS in the repayment of this outstanding obligation?
As I understand, I've not seen anything in writing. The committee and OFB decided to put this in there just so we can set it aside. As I understand it, communication was made with the administration, and they are paying it down at the 5.5 per annum as opposed to having the 20 taken out at one time. Otherwise, we would not have received those two windfalls that we received recently. All right. Any other question on Section 4? There being none, we'll move to 5. Additional tax credit reimbursements. Any issues with that? Any amendments? Okay. On Section 5? None? Section 6? That's the list of all the current general obligation bonds that we have, coming to a total of $78,400,616. Madam Speaker?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to find out exactly whether under D for the Department of Education, because this was discussed last year for the maintenance, the annual maintenance that they've been requesting for. Is that part of Section D, inclusive of not just their the lease, but maintenance as well, their annual maintenance?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions on this service of bonds?
Mr. Chairman, just so, if I may, just so that our people would understand what the variance is between the obligation that was paid in fiscal year 14 and what the obligation will be in 15, can you just reiterate
Yes.
that?
This current fiscal year, out of the general fund, we paid $68 million. It's increased $10 million to $78 million. That may be different from what other people may have read in OPA reports, but those, the $118 million or $110 million includes the revenue bonds that the autonomous agencies are floating and paying. But these are just what we have committed as general obligation bonds of the government of Guam, payable by and through the general fund. That's the only thing that's included in what has to be paid up by the general fund. The revenue bonds that have to be paid out of the revenue from the other agencies.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I know you said that it went from 68 million to now 78 million. What was the 10 million increase from or for?
I'm sorry. I have it in the committee report, and I'm just. Go ahead.
Speaker, just to answer the question on the changes in the debt service. The changes were mainly due to the business privilege tax series A, B, and C. The Series A bond, the debt service increase was 5.9 million. The Series B bond, the debt service increase was 2.6 million, and the Series C was 484,000. And then also, when we compare last year's did not include the DOE Series 2010, the certificate of participation for the JFK borrowing. That one now includes the maintenance and insurance of 1.5. So that makes up the large difference.
Senator Rodriguez and then Senator Mtiaco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, OFB, Ricky, for answering that question. I had a similar question to the speakers. So as we look at moving forward, I know when we had discussions here about about floating a bond and this body giving the authorization, we're looking at different years. And I remember, and if you can help me remember, Mr. Chair and OFB, you know, if we look at 16, we're doing 15 now, we look at 16, 17, 18, at least for those next 3 years, what does our debt obligations look like?
We'll pull it up in a second, just a sec. We'll answer that question. Senator Mtiaco?
Thank
you.
you,
Can ask your
Mr.
question,
Chair.
then we'll answer.
Sure. I'm not sure if this is the right section, but maybe OFB can just, as a point of clarification, I know that there has been discussions regarding the performer meter and how the unfunded liability of the defined benefit retirement fund debt is going to be accounted for in the future. I know right now it's not really part of that performer meter, but it will be as the accounting principles change. Does OFB foresee having to add that somewhere in our budget to account for it? And if so, would it fall under this section or would it fall under a different section? Because it does, although it reflects our debt obligations, right? We budget after budget, we don't identify that liability.
Yeah, Senator Limsiaco, from my understanding on the government-wide audit, currently the way that the unfunded is being recorded is as a note to the financial statement. So it's not a part, I believe under the GASB that you're speaking of, which I believe would take effect next fiscal year for the audit. That would not necessarily be something that would be included in the budget. You mentioned the performer, which is a calculation of multiple factors regarding the finances of the government in Guam. But the effect of from my understanding, the effect of the GASB you're referring to it will be on the government-wide audit and not necessarily the general fund audited portion of the financial statements. And so from a budget perspective, it's unclear of how the body would like to proceed on addressing that, if it needs to be addressed in a budget issue, or if that's something that you'd like to take up in the next budget. But for FY15, I don't believe it may have an effect on the budget per se, at least from a budgeting and expenditure standpoint.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. Yeah, just for the record, I'd just like to point out that, although we do talk about the general obligation bonds and the debt service, and these are the ones that have been identified that are being funded by the general fund, the chair has made mention about the autonomous agencies bond as well. I also like to just point out and recognize that unfunded liability portion of the defined benefit retirement fund, because it does need to be taken into consideration with the decisions that are made on our budgets from year to year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator. And we'll answer Senator Rodriguez's question now.
Senator Rodriguez, to your question regarding, I guess, looking forward on the debt service that at least the legislature would have to appropriate for in the coming years, it appears that it may remain flat given any additional borrowing that may occur between now and then. But just currently what we're seeing is that for FY16, it appears to remain pretty flat as compared to this year. But in FY17, I believe that's when it should spike up to about $6 million above current. And I think that's as a result of the business privilege tax bonds, the capitalized interest portion, the full debt service payments come online in FY17.
Is that satisfactory? Any other questions on the debt obligations? If not, can we close Chapter 1? Thank you. Chapter 2, the Guam Department of Education. Any senators have any amendments that they'd like to make in Section 1, the appropriation? The $230,888,047 is an increase of about $8 million from what they received this current year. The appropriation for GDOE this current year was $222,262,365. The governor recommended $229,751,852, and the committee has recommended a $230,888,047. Any questions, Senator Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some questions, and it may lead to me proffering an amendment. It was stated that the budget for education in FY 2014 was $222 million, of which, if OFB can clarify, how much of that was from, or was intended to be from the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund?
Senator Nicholas, to answer your question, $18 million was from TEFF.
And how much did we actually bring in from the TEFF for the Department of Education?
I believe for the full TEFF, the tracking is around $21.5 million for FY14.
So DOE got fully funded from their TEFF?
Well, there's other appropriations from TEFF. I believe there was $1 million from YOG, and then there's some debt service that has to come out of that as well.
So of the total that was allotted for DOE from TEFF, how much did they receive? Did they receive their total that was allotted, or did they receive short of that?
I believe currently they've received $13.5 million of their 18.
And do you anticipate that they will receive the other $4.5 million before the end of the fiscal year in the next month and a half?
We're hoping so, but That would be an executive branch function.
Does the tracking illustrate that an additional 4.5 million is likely to come into the TEFF within the next month and a half?
Based on the tracking, it's 21 and a half. That's based on BB-Mar's tracking, and I believe the estimate, the projection for it was about 27 million, and so it's tracking short of around 5.5 million or so.
So right now the DOE is short about 4.5 million from the TEFF allotment that they're supposed to be receiving.
I believe so.
Mr. Chairman, the concern I have with the TEFF is that it's based on the property taxes that are assessed on the government. And the reason why we increased that revenue projection for FY 2014 was that we were anticipating a revaluation process to be completed long before we are at where we are right now in this fiscal year. Because that process was not completed, there are lingering concerns that the projected amount in 2014 is not going to be coming in at that rate. And so I'm concerned that going into 2015, we may see a repeat of some kind and any kind of delay with the revaluation that may result in increased revenues from the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. And for me, the increase in the budget for DOE that is being proposed by the committee is a welcomed increase. I think it's a great thing. We always want to be prioritizing education and increasing our commitment to our kids. But I am concerned that we're going to continue to allow the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund to potentially be a source of shortfall within the department. And so what I would like to propose is that the balance as recommended on line 20 of the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund be split by 50% and reallocated, and that full balance instead be thereby added to the general fund appropriation, so that the total for education on line 19 will read 217 million plus the other amounts there that are added from the TEFF. So basically what I'm trying to do is reallocate this Territorial Educational Facilities Fund to other general fund obligations further down in the budget, and have DOE's budget be fully funded from the general fund, so that they won't be shortfall, they won't have any kind of shortfall or have the risk of any shortfall going into fiscal year 2015.
At the beginning, I'm not sure if this is one of those simple amendments where you just move the 17 up and that be in writing. But do you have Senator Yamashita?
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. So then I understand what the move of the amendment is attempting to do, but then who are we potentially shorting?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, it wouldn't be a shortfall if the money actually came in, but what I would like to do is to have that 50% applied to those agencies who are responsible for making sure that money comes in, which would be the Department of Administration and the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
Then that's a much more major amendment. It's not just 17 up.
That's right.
It's going to have to, you're going to have to show where that 8 million is coming from in administration and in rev and tax.
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
And you're going to have to reduce both of those departments by that amount.
That's how we balance the general fund, correct.
Do you have that amendment?
Working on it, Mr. Chair.
All right, so I'll just take a short recess. I want to thank Senator Lim Tiaco. We'll just bookmark this, and we'll continue through the chapter, and we'll come back to him as he prints his, Senator Nicholas, as we get to it. Any other amendments to this chapter on DOE? Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the amendment that I want to proffer, which is in section 2, is an amendment in which was recommended, of course, by the Guam Academy Charter School Council. A letter from the council was delivered to my office on August 12th at 4:38 p.m. and a copy was sent to you and sent to the clerks as well. And I would quote exactly what they have said, that attaches Guam Academy's charter school's budget as submitted to the council, and the request is for $5,715,920. The council recommends that Guam Academy Charter School be funded at its current level of 5,500 students for 520 students, totaling $2,860,000 for fiscal year 2012. And as of course the previous speaker had said, is that, and you yourself, as much as we wanted to even give GDOE, their original request was $298 million, and what they're receiving basically is just $8 million more. And from that $8 million, we're still going to have to subtract the amount then that was recommended by the council based on the per pupil cost and the number of students of $2.8 million. So that's going to be $2.8 million less from the $8 million that DOE will be getting. And DOE, of course, is right now operating from what they have given us about 31,698 students, and what we're talking about here is 500, and at the time, currently 515 students at GACS. And so the amendment then is to reflect, it's not necessarily the legislature making a decision and micromanaging and striking out whatever is in their budget, but strictly on the basis of the recommendation from the Guam Academy Charter Schools of 5,500 per student at 520 students, of course totaling $2,860,000 for the new fiscal year. What I also would like to share with our colleagues is that, and correct it, and correct the information that I had given the media at the time, only because it was, when it was handed to me from your office, the analysis of the per pupil cost, it was actually then a copy that came from the Department of Education. And I know that they continually quote Mr. Malay at the time over a year ago, making a statement of 6,600 per student. But in the analysis that was done, when you factor in the students from both schools, and then you factor in facilities, and even with or without facilities, or let me do it this way, without the facilities, DOE students will be at 5,375, and with GACS it'll be 5,500, because that was what the budget had stated. If you factor in facilities, because GACS, the government is paying with a different cost, payment, which is tax credits of $1.2 million, then you take DOE and the TFF, the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, and the library, then DOE students will be receiving $5,737, and GACs will be receiving then, if we were going to use it and that factor that in, their students will be at $7,873. Now this is an analysis that was done by the Department of Education. So the legislature, what we're saying, and even with the committee, is that we're not micromanaging in the sense, because we do have this council that gives the charter, awards a charter or grants a charter, and it'll be only them also through an evaluation to determine whether their charter should continue. The legislature, of course, supports the per pupil cost in the sense that this money comes right out of DOE's budget. So in the amendment that my vice chair and I have proffered then is to basically use the language in the letter provided by the council, that it would say on line 5 after the word school, not to exceed 520 students as recommended by the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council. So that's the amendment, and I think everybody has a copy.
On that amendment, any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Duenas?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to rise in full support of the amendment and commend the mover and as well as my colleague, Senator Yamashita. I think the most important verbiage to me in this amendment is of course, the as recommended by the Guam Academy Charter School Council. I know that prior to the commencing back into session here in the Committee of the Whole, Mr. Chairman, we had a number of parents and students and others that have come to visit us with regard to this process. And, just as much as we have been respectful of the board with regard to Department of Education and the working relationship that we see at this point in time between the superintendent and that board, I think it's just as critical, Mr. Chairman, to recognize the council and their work, and that their recommendations and that they're basically monitoring and also implementing how the charter schools to be run is to be respected. And so I think the amendment is a good amendment, and I think it's also, this is our opportunity as a body, I believe, to recognize that while we are most sensitive to any of our constituents coming forward with regard to budgetary matters and other government operation matters, we also do and have to respect those councils and that are put in place that are charged with the responsibility of carrying out those duties. So I want to thank the mover of the amendment, and I want to thank this body for recognizing the autonomy of that council to manage the day-to-day operations and how these charter schools to be moving forward. And to show also, as mentioned by the speaker, that there should be no disparity with the rest of our public school children who deserve equal treatment when it comes to the application of their needs for education. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak on this amendment.
Thank you very much. Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a concern, and I just want hopefully the mover of the amendment can clear it up. Through some of the discussions or what's been taking place at the charter school, we're seeing an exodus of teachers back into the DOE system, and obviously that is due in part to compensation and the Fair Compensation Act, or wage. And I just want some clarification with the author. I'm sure this may have been addressed with the council. However, I just want to ensure that the teachers that I spoke with a few days ago have some assurance that will come in line with the Department of Education's competitive wage, and to ensure that we don't lose any more teachers to the Guam Charter School. If that could be clarified?
Do you yield?
Yes, I do. And thank you very much for that question. The conversation, of course, continued when we met yesterday. And I have to give really credit to one of our colleagues, and that's Senator Yamashita, who, of course, and there are several of us who had a heart set of wanting to move forward with the pre-K program, but knowing that the Department of Education is just not ready, that the $5 million that the governor had provided in the budget, or the original budget, was actually, given to the department to be able to use also to address the discrepancies for the GACS teachers who came out of the Department of Education to then get the hay, increase. And of course, with that amount, it would definitely take care of, because it's going to be part of the Department of Education's operations budget. So that would be addressed in that the language there would address that.
So, thank you. So in your review, to not exceed 520 students as recommended by the council, that will basically allow them the flexibility to address that situation. I mean, I'm assuming that's one concern that we all have to be hoping that takes place.
Well, you have to remember that in budgeting, and we did not specify how much they were saying is for operations, how much is for personnel, how much it is for all the different object categories. So it's going to be incumbent, of course, upon the management that when they design their budget, that they do that first before they go in and add all the extra items that they may want to provide for the school. And that's why the charter, because it opens, of course, the possibilities to go out and apply for federal grants and private grants. It is not to be totally dependent on the government to provide their full funding. They have greater flexibility in getting those grants versus our regular public schools, when they apply for special ed funds or other grants that are available in like Title I. The charter school have the flexibility to actually get monies from private foundations, private organizations out there that our regular DOE cannot.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Chair, I just want to raise that concern because the reality is right now, I know we all support charter schools and we all know that one size doesn't fit everybody. I mean, the education system is out there and it's doing well. We heard it from the students, we heard it from their parents, but the reality is there is clearly teachers leaving the charter schools, go back into the DO system, and that's kind of an easy fit because DOE is short teachers and they'll take them in a heartbeat, but we don't want to allow that opening to continue and eventually we see our charter school continue to do no because of the shortage of teachers in their school. So I do hope that this amendment, and hopefully if they're listening, that we raise that concern and that the council and the administrators are aware that we have also addressed those teachers' concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Morrison. I have Senator Munya-Barnes and then Senator Arvin.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I too don't have a problem with this amendment. As a matter of fact, maybe just wanting a little bit clarification based on what was submitted by the council per pupil amount per enrollee, and the added amendment not to exceed the 520 students as recommended, and maybe maybe it's just me almost getting to that senior moment, but I was just told, or if I remember correctly, that there was an article or mentioned to me that if the charter school didn't get the amount per enrollee as requested, that student population will drop by another 100 students. And I just maybe want a clarification from the author based on what was truly requested by the council versus the request from the school itself.
Do you yield, Madam Speaker?
Yes, I will. I think where that statement is coming from is not entirely true, and I'll explain. Their current enrollment is 515. When they started, it wasn't that number, but by the end of the school year was 515. Where that statement is coming from is at the assumption, because in their budget they had a proposal to open a second campus. And to open that second campus, they were hoping to recruit 300 students who would be made up of a high school campus. And because then in order then to be able to pay the $600,000 that they're asking in their budget for a new facility, because they can't fit there, and another $120,000 for collateral equipment, and then a whole list of teachers and aides and a nurse and a counselor and an administrator, all that, and even an AmeriCorps director, all that was supposed to be then the additional monies that they're going to need for the expansion. And so they, in our conversation, in our office, yourself, Mr. Vice Speaker was there, Senator Aline Yamashita and I were there, and that told us then that they were willing to reduce it from the original 300 that they wanted to increase down to 150. But even with that, that would still require, every time you're going to set up a whole new campus, it requires a whole set of employees that you currently have in an existing school. So it's like another charter school, so to speak, but it's an expansion. Because normally if you have, let's say even the total 800 in one campus, you would have one administrator, one counselor, one nurse, teachers, office aides, clerks, instructional aides and all that. But when you take all of them and you put them in a different campus, minutes away, driving rather distance, then you're going to have another set of employees. So it will not hamper their current operations with the current number of students. The Charter Council had upped it by an additional 5 students from 515 to 520. So it should not then affect those students who are not even in the system, because if you look carefully in their budget, what they're also asking is $8,000 to do a lottery. That means whatever numbers of students they get, and they've gotten to the max that they have to do a lottery. The other request in their budget was $10,000 to do a marketing to recruit students. So that's an additional $18,000 to do just those two things.
Is that satisfactory, Senator?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the author for the clarification. And I just want to see then, based on that statement, I don't have an objection to the amendment as proffered. Sinamasi.
Senator Ruggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I also would like to just reiterate a statement that was made by one of the previous speakers in regards to this particular information originating from the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council. And I think it's very appropriate that the legislature and the chairperson of education has heeded the request of the council members in light of some of the activities that have been taking place over the course of the last couple of days. But I want to also, Mr. Vice Speaker, highlight the participation of the students and some of the representatives of the school who came down yesterday because they came down advocating and requesting for consideration by this body. And I think that by virtue of them exercising their right to be able to request assistance from this body, it really encouraged, at least the way I looked at it, encouraged the students to be able to participate in their government. And I just wanted to comment and to commend them for reaching out and requesting assistance, but I certainly hope that the teachers would understand and the administrators would understand that in this particular case, the chairman of education, based on the request by the schools council, is yielding to that particular request in terms of the funding requirement for the upcoming fiscal year. So there will be other opportunities down the road in terms of them meeting their mission and their goals of expanding and growing their facilities and the educational opportunities for the students. But I think that in this particular case, just highlighting that the council came forward, presented their request, the chair has accommodated their request in this particular budget, and I'd certainly like to thank the students as well as the representatives from the school who participated in their government process yesterday. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Dragon. Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I stand in full support of this amendment, and I appreciate the statements that have been made by our colleagues. I applaud the leadership of the Speaker of this House, and as well as she is also the leader of our Education Committee, Mr. Vice Speaker. This, as we are reminded by many of the email messages that we get, is a new initiative on our island. And that being said, there's always going to be growth curves. There's always going to be lessons to be learned. And so through it all, we really have been trying very hard to help them know what to do and how to do it. We have always been accessible. We have had multitude of meetings. We have been open to how can we best help. We have been, and that stands for the record. I'm not going to go into great detail about what those meetings look like because I don't want to sound defensive of what I'm trying to say. And all I am saying right now is that when you look at the data, the charter school student is getting more than our GDOE student. But yet we support that. And we support it as what the previous speaker just said, is we have 500 strong students at this school who are very happy, who are learning, we believe. We haven't seen actual studies yet, but we believe that they're learning. And so there's a leap of faith here. The processes and rules and regs have been defined by statute. They have been defined by Charter School Council. They have been defined by their own trustees. So we, as Madam Speaker has said over and over again, we will not micromanage, but we would respect what those rules and regs are, and that's what we have done. We've done this notwithstanding the missed timelines. All of this should have happened in February, and it didn't. But we're not making that a big issue, but I'm just saying that for the record. And for whatever the reason is that budget didn't get in place and adopted and moved forward, it didn't. The Board of Education hasn't even seen this budget yet, but we are, again, through a leap of faith, saying that this is what we'll give them. So we are fully supporting GACs. They have raised repeatedly that we don't support them because they're not involved in the school lunch program. Mr. Vice Speaker, for the record, the federal folks at GDOE have been waiting very patiently since February for the documents. The documents that they've sent over twice are not the documents that are needed to be a part of the program. And I just put that on record because there are now many interviews. There's a lot of social media occurring that are faulting the 15 of us, the 14 of us, for not fully supporting them. And it is really important for me, for teachers, to understand that they need to be truthful and honest, that the integrity to the processes are crucial, particularly when you're a teacher. Be mindful of what you're representing. Do we always agree? Of course not. That's the beauty of the world we live in. But when you're going out and making blatant statements about how we don't support, that we're not being fair, and that we don't respect them, that's just wrong. So this amendment, for the record, says that we do uphold them, and that we do respect them, and that as a matter of fact, they're getting more than what our GDOE kids are getting. And so we continue to try to help them in the lunch program. This office has been continuously involved in that. This is what you need. This is who you need to speak to. This is what you need to do. And as of yesterday, we got another email from them saying that's what they're trying to do. So, and then what Senator Morrison raised about the competitive wage, that just needs to be worked into it, and it will be. The money, I think, is there. The budgeting can happen, but they need to budget for it, and they need to forward that. So I support this amendment. I really believe it says that we do stand by these 515, 520 students. We applaud the energy, the effort, the vision, the mission of the GACS community, and we continue. The idea that they were going to have 300 more students, Mr. Vice Speaker, my question was, where are we putting them? They had an RFI or an RFP out, Mr. Vice Speaker, but they didn't have any money to back it. So again, we're trying to help them understand that there are procurement rules and regulations that need to guide everything that we do. And so as we know that they're getting a handle on it, we remind them that this is what you need to do. We have connected them many times with Claudia and Robert Kono at GSA. And so it's, perhaps it's a work in progress. And perhaps extra patience is needed. But Mr. Vice Speaker, I believe that that patience is at the table and that we are continuing to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamashita. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Juan Pat Yamashita amendment? Is there an objection to the amendment? I understand that Senator Nicholas has distributed his proposed amendment. Senator Nicholas.
I have, Mr. Chair.
I think we can. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And just to clarify once again, this amendment is being proffered in retrospect to what has transpired in fiscal year 2014. I do recall our colleague, the late Speaker Ben Pangilinan, being very adamant in his line of questioning with the SES, and particularly with the Department of Revenue and Taxation, about whether or not their projections about the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund with respect to the property taxes that it's intended to bring in are in fact going to come in at the rate that they were saying in fiscal year 2014. Assurances were given, they were reiterated, they were repeated, and we come to this point where those assurances did not come through. The cost of that assurance not coming through has been a shortfall to the Department of Education. And all of us in here, we always talk about committing to our kids and making sure that the resources are prioritized into our three key areas: health, education, and public safety. However, for us to be tagging a fund to education that is, again, projecting revenue based on the assurances of the very same groups that made those same assurances this fiscal year, I don't believe in repeating the same mistake twice. And so in order for us to ensure that those projections are going to come in, and in order for us to ensure that education is funded at the rate that we intend, I have introduced this amendment, which would basically take the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund amount, split it in half, redistribute it between the Department of Revenue and Taxation and the Department of Administration on their general fund appropriations, and increase the general fund appropriation of the Department of Education so that they'll be able to access their revenue streams from a less, a less aggressive projection basis than the TEFF. Right now, our general fund revenues, our income tax, withholding tax, corporate income tax, those projected increases are at a much lower percentage than the projected increase of the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. And so in order for us to insulate education, to ensure that they get the money that we're saying and we're committing to in this budget, and to make sure also that the increases in the TEFF actually do take effect by the agencies responsible for making that happen, I would like to proffer this amendment so that all of those things can take place. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Duenas, then Speaker Wampat, Senator Yamashita.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to address this amendment. While I certainly appreciate the retiring speaker and the movers' sentiment on the commitment to education, I just have to state clearly for the record that we are now going down the road, in my opinion, of changing the rules of engagement that we agreed upon when we first began this process. We started this morning by adopting the revenues. And now we have gone back, so we've done two things. We've basically violated the rule that we wouldn't be going back once we adopted the revenues by object category. And then now we've basically changed and can be going down the road now basically of unbalancing the budget because of these changes and the committed funding source allocations. Now, once again, I believe even in offline conversations with colleagues from both sides of the aisle that there is a reconciliation and a pending amount of money, and with regard to the corrections of the TEFF forthcoming after having funded the reevaluation and after OFB and understanding our good chairman who has passed his concerns, notwithstanding, the committee continued to work and the administration continued to work diligently with reconciling these issues. So once again, Mr. Chairman, I am not going to argue the merit of the movers' concerns. What I will argue is a departure from our agreed rules of engagement, and also I will argue that we are going down the road, I believe, with this amendment in operating outside of our good faith agreement that we would allow for the fiscal management by the executive branch of government working with the Department of Education to ensure the realization of the funding in its proper categories and forms. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we'll listen to the dialogue, but I will go ahead and object at this point.
Mr. Chairman, if I may make a point of information.
Yes, please.
The statements from the retiring speaker that we're going to be unbalancing the budget is incorrect. We are not changing anything that we've already adopted in Section 2. We are reallocating what we've adopted in Section 2. So we're going to be substituting general fund revenue with territorial educational facilities fund revenue in the Department of Education and offsetting that substitution with a corresponding decrease in the general fund revenue in the Department of Revenue and Taxation and the Department of Administration. So from a numbers perspective and a budgetary perspective, all the revenues are staying the same. What we're doing is we're saying the funding streams are going to change, and the reason why we're changing those funding streams is because they have not been reliable in the past.
And we may need to make an amendment to the statute that created the TEFF, because if memory serves me right, it's all education related. But there's been an objection. I'll hear Senator Wampat and then Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that segue, because you're right. Former Speaker Ben, of course, had created this Territorial Education Facilities Fund in the 22nd Guam Legislature, and the 23rd is when we came in, and that's when I learned of that fund. And it's specifically designed, yes, to be able to support, in addition to providing monies for education institutions, DOE, GCC, and UOG. Now, for those who have not been, of course, in the legislature at the time when I was there, is that former Speaker Mark Forbes at one time wanted to use GRTs to give 80% of that. Everyone was trying to figure out a way, how can we get money to DOE, looking at different other accounts or special accounts to do this. TEFF, of course, continues to be the funding source in addition, because as you know, the tracking of TEFF is about only I think from what I heard earlier in the discussion, they were tracking at $21 million, and that 18 million of that went to GDOE and 1 million to the university for their capital improvement projects. Now, my understanding as well, and Ricky can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we had appropriated $18 million, but the government was tracking $21 million, we also know from the testimony from DOE that the governor had only released $13.5 million, therefore holding in reserves $4.5 million. Is that a correct statement? So that being the case, so it is not that TEFF is not a sustainable or a reliable source of funding for DOE, because if anything else, we would be seeing that the amount would go up, because the TEFF is totally based on real property taxes. So that means when there are new businesses coming in and starting up, building their own business office, new homes, there are lots of condominiums that have gone up, individual executive homes have been built. We just did a ribbon cutting for the Summer Green, so that's a whole new facility that will be paying into then the real estate taxes. Therefore, we can expect then that there will be more funding available. And surely not, of course, to the tune of $200 million that we want to, say, dedicate that total source for education. But the numbers are definitely expected to go up. So I don't see this really as a legislative budgeting issue, because we've done due diligence in terms of appropriating them out based on then looking at their track. We know that the money's there. We know that there's $4.5 million of TFF monies that have not gone to DOE, and that then really boils down to it being an executive matter, and that if the governor then releases, that reserve or that hold on $4.5 million, then GDOE will be whole. So I just want anyone to think that this is not a reliable source of money, because it really is, and we expect it to get better. We've provided for, as you know, in just this legislative session, not today, but in this 32nd Guam Legislature, is to provide additional funding of over $1 million to the Department of Rev and Tax, so that they'll be able to go out and contract, of course, the re-eval of all properties. And what they have indicated to us is that they've done some overlays on their own, and every new building being built, and of course they have used the new assessment for those new buildings. It's the older ones now that need to be brought up to the current standards. So I mean, I'm going to end it here, because I see some, other reactions going on. Maybe I'm saying too much, but I just want to make sure that we really understand that this is, the TEFF is the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund for Education, and that we are tracking beyond the 18 million. We are now at 21 million. The governor has chosen to only release 13.5. Therefore, this is a plea to the governor, is to please release the 4.5 to GDOE. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Senator Yamashita, then Senator Morrison, then Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. So, Mr. Vice Speaker, I too object to this amendment. And while the mover of the amendment has said that He's just shifting the numbers and it's not imbalancing the amounts. For me, the last, I think it's been 2 days we've been in joint caucus. Maybe it's been more than that. But I do know that it's been a lot of hours that we've been in joint caucus. And for me, I truly appreciated what occurred at that table. It was, for me, a collaborative working of good faith about where we wanted to get and how we were going to get there. There are a couple of times some of us walked out, but that's what happens. But at the end of that joint caucus, we agreed. And I agreed for that one thing that I really wanted that isn't going to happen this time around, for that base amount of money, that we would keep it then at GDOE, because I listened to you, Mr. Vice Speaker. And so the good faith was that we are going to help DOA, Bureau Budget, Rev and Tax. We were going to have faith in what they were going to do while we helped a couple of other agencies. For me, this amendment is saying that we don't have that faith in these agencies. And indeed, I'm the first one to talk about accountability. And that's my problem with GDOE. I think everyone knows that's my problem with GDOE. They get lots of money, and I haven't seen the accountability. But I understand what's on the table, and so I try to work with everybody. So for that effort, for that reason, in all the time we've spent in Joint Caucus about trying to come to consensus, I believe that that it takes apart what we worked hard to put together. So I object. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Morrison, then Senator Dragon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure what to say about this amendment, but we just got off discussions with our process of how we're handling the Guam charter schools and respecting the council and ensuring that, we worked within those parameters and not try to micromanage. I'm concerned with this amendment, Mr. Chair, because I don't even believe the Guam Education Board has seen this amendment, or their administrators, or the superintendent. And we are attempting to experiment with something that has, as previous speaker stated, that has been a reliable funding source. We are experimenting by slashing out a funding source that's clearly worked for many, many years. And I'm concerned, Mr. Chair, that this is the largest agencies that with the largest budget, yet we're looking to strike through the TEF and just reappropriate it without any input from the key stakeholders that have come down and repeatedly have never made this type of request. I don't recall them making any such a type of request, although I know it's up to the prerogative of each member of this body to make such revisions, amendments, or revisions, but this is clearly a concern if we continue to go down this path with this budget and do such a thing, especially with our education department. So as we've done with the Guam Council or Charter, let's respect the key stakeholders here, which is the board, the superintendent. This is not something they presented to us. Actually, Mr. Chair, there is an increase in this budget for Department of Education, and there's a lot of work that went into this through our joint caucus. So I object to this, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Dragon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, Chairman. I just would like to express some concern with regards to how this reallocation of TEFF resources are being applied. And I want to share a concern because if you take a look at what comes off the top, anytime revenues are generated by the government, it's the debt service. So whatever the debt service is that's applied to the TAFF, I believe if I can get the OFB director to clarify.
7.8 million.
So you've got $7.8 million in which the TAFF generates revenues either on a monthly basis or every quarter, whatever that sequence or formula is. Then the reality is DOA will not have any funds or will have limited funds for operations and revenue tax, looking at how it is going to be presented in the budget should this amendment pass. That's a concern I have. Because really, DOA provides a critical service to this entire government of Guam. Revenue tax provides a critical service to the community of Guam. And when we look at this sequence and how it could conceivably be interpreted and carried out, then it could affect the operations of these two critical agencies in the government. I understand what the mover of the amendment is trying to do. And he has a very legitimate concern because fundamentally he wants to ensure that if in fact we're saying in this budget $230 million, $230.8 million is going to DOE for operations and personnel, then at the end of the day, he wants to ensure, like all of us want to, in passing and considering this budget, that $230.8 million goes to DOE. But I'd like to also lean on the side of the chair who alluded to the TEFF increasing in its revenue projection. That's one component. For fiscal year 14, the tracking right now is in excess.
I apologize to the members. And I apologize to the members. I apologize to my colleagues. I probably should have been more clear with TAFF, okay? And TEFF. And you know I can be as partisan as everybody else and will call the governor out and everybody else, whoever else. But this one, it was my mistake, all right? TEFF adopted revenue was 27. We're tracking 21. From that 21, we had to take off 7.8 for the general obligation bond, Series 2007A. So that left about 14 million. The governor did not short GDOE. All that was left was 14.5. So I want to make that clarification, and I apologize to the members for not stating that clearly at the very beginning. All right? Okay. I'm sorry, Senator Agan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for that clarification, because obviously the fund did not reach or is not anticipated to reach its revenue projection for this FY. And
Correct.
that's why I'm
we had
saying
anticipated 27, we received 21, we had to take 7.8 out, it only had 14. Consequently, that's all the GDOE received, was the 14 that was the balance after we paid the general obligation bond. So,
correct, but with the anticipation, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the anticipated possible increase in real estate taxes into the TAFF, and then the implementation of the appraise process commencing in sometime in the first quarter, possibly, of this upcoming fiscal year, then the revenue projection that you have incorporated into this budget may be realized in fiscal year 15. And I'm not going to hang my hat on it, but certainly that's something that we need to anticipate in terms of all the discussions and in terms of the contract having been given out in April of this year, that the appraised assessment or the reappraised assessment is ongoing or should be completed by sometime the first quarter of the fiscal year and then subsequently implemented. So that's why I'm fairly optimistic with the source of funding, the TEFF, that based on your revenue projection, based on evaluating the projected revenues for this fiscal year, that we can stand firm on that number reaching the Department of Education. And that's my position as it relates to this particular provision and this particular amendment. Thank you very much, Mr.
thank you.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, as was clarified by my statement earlier. even when you use your correction, you were still talking about 17,967,302 as opposed to the 21 realized, even though it was short of the cap. So I still think we're talking about a reliable funding source in excess of even what has been appropriated here. So my point being that I think we're still secure on that, but we did shift the chairs in terms of how we made our commitment going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. You may close.
Just to
Oh,
clarify.
wait, hold on. Anybody else? None. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you very much for clarifying, because I know that when I had made the statements with the numbers, I asked that question, am I saying this correctly? And, of course, somebody nodded their head up there, and so I proceeded. So now I have to ask this question then, is that although, yes, in page 10, the TFF is appropriating $17.9 million to GDOE, plus the $1 million for UOG, but then in the revenue projections for TFF is now going to be $28.5 million.
Yes, the 28.5 is as was recommended by the governor's office.
And they feel very confident then that even though at one time it was 27 and we only came in at 21, what are some of the factors that would, for them to justify that it would go up to 28?
Well, though I share the mover's apprehension, because he has had several oversights with revenue and taxation, the reevaluation, though it went out in April, they keep insisting it should be finished before the end of this month. It goes to the Board of Equalization in September and October, and then it will there'll be new revised tax statements issued in November. There may be a delay. I don't know how much of a delay, but they have assured the chairman, and I understand his ambivalence, if that's as nice as I could possibly put it, that it'll occur. We're taking it on faith that they will move forward. The tax statements may not go out before the 4th of November, but they may come out on the 7th with the new statements. But they are insistent that they're going to move forward with it, and so we feel comfortable in making this recommendation.
Did they say what the anomaly was, of course, that they were not able to meet that because
They did not complete the reevaluation that you and Senator Barnes provided for. You guys found some money to pay them to do the evaluation?
Exactly.
Yes.
To do
And
the
unfortunately, they didn't award the contract until just this April. And so
Thank you.
that's the reason why it wasn't made. But it was awarded in April. They are working on it, and they're insistent they're going to finish it. I can understand some concerns about whether or not it will or will not, but I have a feeling that in the need to try to make ends meet in the upcoming year, that they may be a short delay, but the new tax statements may come out before Christmas. Anyway, we'll allow the mover to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also for your clarification. I really appreciate that, because that was entirely the premise upon which this was based. The projection in 2014 was 27 million, and it came dramatically short of that, because the anticipation was that we were going to complete the revaluation within the last fiscal year. It did not happen. That same anticipation is made now, and while contracts may have been issued, we don't know until the money actually starts coming in and the assessments are in fact complete what the true revenue numbers are going to be. And we also don't know what the timeline of completion is actually going to be. And just to put some backstory into why I'm kind of concerned at this point, When I had an oversight hearing with the Department of Revenue and Taxation in February, I was assured that there is going to be online services provided in April. Only come to find out in July that a PO wasn't issued for the online services, and now we're waiting all the way up until January. And so while we always try and operate with a position of trust, and we're always going to continue trusting each other, our responsibility here as legislators and appropriators of the people's money is to make sure the priorities that we're looking at funding are actually going to get funded at the levels that we are anticipating and intending. And for DOE to be intended to be funded at $230 million is dramatically short of what it is that they were asking for in their budget, but at the very least, we cannot allow them to plan around a figure that may not materialize. And if prior revenue in the TEFF is any indication, we need to do two things. We need to, one, make sure that they can reliably budget around the amount that we're giving them, and two, we need to do what we can to ensure that those additional revenues that we are anticipating are going to come in. And for me, there's no better way to make sure that money is going to come in than to have the very agencies that are responsible for bringing it in dependent upon that money coming in order for them to operate. Now, mind you, it was mentioned by one of the retiring speakers that these agencies are critical, and they are. They're critical for us bringing revenue into this government. The reality is that the governor has more than enough tools available to him to keep those agencies operating if that revenue stream is delayed in any way, or if that revenue stream comes under projected in any way. And the governor will have a vested interest in making sure those agencies are bringing in that money, because those agencies are what he's going to use to continue funding the rest of the government. Now, if, on the other hand, we tag TEF, we allow it to remain in education, and education comes up short because TEF came in short, the consequence, while it may not sound like a big deal for the overall operations of the government, the consequences are children. The consequences are classrooms, our teachers. The consequence is $6 million short in TEFF this year that is not going to education. And so for me, my intent is to make sure, and this isn't an experiment that was stated, this is budgeting. This is prioritizing and using funding streams that are reliable to offset funding streams that have historically proven unreliable because of agencies' inability to follow through on the implementation of those funding streams. So the general fund is a reliable source, and it's reliable because it has multiple streams flowing into it: income tax, corporate income tax, withholding taxes. That general fund should really, as much as possible, be the funding basis for health, education, and public safety. In this amendment that I'm proposing, I'm trying to streamline the funding source of education to the general fund so that DOE can look at the bottom line and say, we are supposed to get $230 million, and unless there is some kind of general fund crisis, we're going to get $230 million. And the reason why this amendment makes me more comfortable, again, is that our general fund projections, the increases are 3 to 4%, versus the projected increase in the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund from actual revenue in 2014 to projected in 2015 is another $8 million, or almost a 40% increase. So for me, do I want to make DOE dependent on a 3% increase in general fund or a 40% increase in Territorial Educational Facilities Fund? The logic is very simple. I would much rather have DOE dependent upon the general fund. So this isn't an experiment, this is budgeting. And lastly, on the issue of the Joint Caucus, I do appreciate sitting down with my colleagues, but I would like to also at this time remind all of us that we agreed on the basis of what it was that we're going to put forward here in the substitute bill, but we also mentioned that we're going to be putting forward amendments that we might not be able to get a consensus on, but we're still going to reserve the right to put those amendments forward so that we can move what we believe needs to be moved in this budget. And that is why I'm putting this amendment forward. And I respect the perspectives of my colleagues, but I believe that prioritizing education by getting them funded from the general fund as much as possible would be fully aligned with our intention to make education as a priority. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicholas. There is an objection. All those in favor of this Nicholas amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. It's 12:25. I wanted to finish the chapter, but I think I will recess for lunch so that we don't. All right. 2 o'clock.